distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. This is the second time I have had having the opportunity to introduce my brother and Professor Dr. Tariq Ramadan. The last time I introduced him, I said he's the durian of scholars. Anyone who knows what durian is, you either like it or hate it. And in scholarship, if people have been reading about Tariq Ramadan in the papers and in other journals and others, you will realize what I'm talking about. Professor Tariq Ramadan is Professor of Contemporary Studies at the Oxford University, the Oriental Institute, St. Anthony's College, and he also teaches at the Oxford Faculty of Theology. He's a visiting professor at the Faculty of Islamic Studies, Qatar, and the University of Malaysia, Paris, and a senior fellow at Doshisha University, Kyoto, Japan. He's also the director of the Research Center of Islamic Legislation and Ethics, KAIL, with which we have a collaboration in Doha, Qatar. He holds an MA in Philosophy and French Literature and PhD in Arabic and Islamic Studies from the University of Geneva. In Cairo, Egypt, he received one-on-one intensive training in classical Islamic scholarship from Al-Azhar University scholars, a Ijazat in 7 disciplines. Through his writings and lectures, Tariq has contributed to the debate on the issues of Muslims in the West and Islamic revival in the Muslim world. He's an active academic at the grassroots level, lecturing extensively throughout the world in theology, ethics, social justice, ecology, and interfaith, as well as intercultural dialogue. He's the president of the European think tank, European Muslim Network, EMN, based in Brussels. The list of his publication is in the bulletin for your information. Without further ado, I would like to call Brother Tariq to give his presentation, which will be about 40 minutes, and we will have the chance to have an interactive question and answer session.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you once again for this introduction and also for this invitation. Alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure for me to be here, knowing that inshallah in the coming years with the University of Oxford and KAIL, the center, we'll have activities and collaboration between our institutions and focus, but also SOAS is here trying to work together on many different projects. And it's a way for us to start talking about ethics and talking about our understanding. So as I have 40 minutes, I will try to go straight to some of the points that I wanted to make. And as you saw with my title, it's mainly talking about the sources of Islamic ethical teaching, and then reforming our understanding and education about Islamic applied ethics. So it's 2 parts, but mainly it's, I will explain why I think it's important to talk about the sources, and understanding the sources and to have a deep understanding of the sources should help us to reform our way of teaching and educating and understanding the very specific field of Islamic applied ethics. Let me start with something which is important when you navigate and when you travel around the world and from Arabic and you use different languages. It's true that if you come to ethics in English and you try to get with the understanding in Arabic of what ethics means in English or in the philosophical field, and more importantly, in all these fields where now we are used to speak about ethics when it comes to medicine, when it comes to environment, when it comes to all the specific fields, for example, even when you have bioethics, which is very specifically said. In fact, we come back in Arabic and we speak about al-akhlaq, or al-akhlaqiyat. And in fact, al-akhlaq or al-akhlaqiyat are not exactly what ethics means in not only in the other languages, but also in the different fields. What do we mean by this? And I think it's important for us to come and to get a clear understanding of what we mean by al-akhlaq and why we are using this term. Not to try to adapt to the Western language, but to be clear about our own reference as Muslims from within the Islamic tradition. It's not an answer to contemporary questions, it's a revisiting of our legacy, our terminology, understanding what we mean by this. Because it might be that the way we deal with akhlaq is not exactly the way we should deal with ethics in a very rationalistic way, and I will explain why. This is why I think it's important to understand the word. Two things that are important here is the Prophet ﷺ said, explaining his mission, and we keep on repeating this hadith, which is a very important one, because it helps us to understand that the very specific end and goal of the prophetic mission was to do this, is to complete the good character. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I was only sent to complete the good character, to beautify and to complete. And the good character is for us, it's makarim al-akhlaq is the way you behave, it's also the way you understand. It's, in fact, if you think about it, in the light of the Quran and in the light of the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, this prophetic tradition is the right way of doing things. It's there is a right way. So it's not only understanding the limits, it's not only understanding the goals, is to use the right means to achieve the right goals, the right way of doing things. And the right way of doing things means that we are considering the means as much as the ends, and the ends in the light of the means. There is no way for us to use wrong means to achieve right. مَا بُنِيَ عَلَى الْبَاطِلِ فَهُوَ بَاطِلٌ. What is wrong from the very beginning is wrong. So I think that the relationship here, straight from the beginning, is the source is coming from God, the example is the Prophet ﷺ, the means should be right and the goal should be right. So al-akhlaq here, it's all together considering the source, understanding the means, and never forgetting the goals and the ends. So this is what it's meant when we speak about the good character, the good behavior, what it means to do something right in this life. So I think that we need to come with this why, because it might be that if we forget about the source, if we don't get the right understanding of the ends, and if we are not clear on the means, we can answer contemporary questions with a way which is not a comprehensive way. It's just to be updated or to have updated answers to contemporary questions. But we have to be careful, because sometimes the problem is not the answer, the problem is the way the question is put in ethical terms. And from an Islamic perspective, you'll see that when it comes to applied Islamic ethics, not only we have to deal with the way questions are, answers should be given, but questions are put in very specific field. So having said that, now I don't have time. You can understand that in 40 minutes. It's just to open. It's an introduction to a problem. The introduction to the problem is that we should not underestimate the question of terminology in what we are talking about. And to go very quickly to say akhlaq or akhlaqiyat or what the Prophet, peace be upon him, was saying, what he was referring to, utammimu makarim al-akhlaq, meant in fact that it's ethics and that's it. I think it's more complex than this. It's a more comprehensive and deep way to deal with this, and it might be that Muslims on this have a contribution to make. Second thing which it's important for us, having said this and getting this comprehensive approach, it's from terminology we need to deal with the sources. And this is where among scholars today, but within the Islamic tradition, we can see that we do not always agree on what are the sources. And you know that there are two main trends from Al-Ash'ariyya and the philosophical trend, the more rationalist trend. Even the sources were not agreed upon in the Islamic history. Now, what we accept, and we all agree as Muslims, and we have to repeat this, is because it's also a way for us to deal with the comprehensive approach which is needed. The first source, of course, is the Quran al-Karim. And the Quran al-Karim is a source, meaning that in fact, as Muslims, what we think is that the revelations and the last revelations are bringing us something which cannot be reached by reason only. And this is where, في المنقذ من الضلال, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, when he is dealing with this, he's quite clear about three things. The first is that, yes, we can go through the experience of doubting, we can go through the experience of reasoning, but reason and doubt will be solved as a problem in the light of the revelation. And between revelation and our rationality, there is an act of faith that this is coming from God. So the fact that you rely on reason and the fact that you are accepting doubt, the way you solve the problem of doubt is not by rational means only. It's with faith and is with your believing in God. And once again, in our contemporary world, with the questions and the way they are put, this source of faith as being central in the way we deal with the problem and the comprehensive approach, it's important. Now, the second source is, of course, the Sunnah al-Rasul ﷺ, prophetic traditions. And remember when Aisha radiallahu anha was questioned about this, the word that she used to explain who he was not only by referring to his faith or to his belief, is كَانَ خُلُقُهُ الْقُرْآنِ. How was the Prophet? خُلُقُهُ, once again, is the good character. In fact, he was the embodiment of the principles referring to the source and dealing with the world. كَانَ خُلُقُهُ الْقُرْآنِ means his source was the Quran, his understanding was his light, and his way of behaving was in this world. So all what I said about the definition is there. And I think it's important is the good character is behaving, understanding in the light of the last revelation. And the third source, which is also important that we have everywhere in our tradition, with the first fuqaha, what I call them ulama al-nusus, and I'm very specific with this. Why I call the fuqaha or al-usuliyun ulama al-nusus, it's because in fact there are other ways of being alim. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. The reference to the verse, the Quran, is not meant here only with the people who read the book. The Quran is the people who understand the world. So the third source is in fact the universe, Sunnatullah. So what is Sunnatullah? It could be Sunan al-Kawniyya, which is things that are clear-cut. As much as we have in the Quran qat'iyyat, verses that are not disputable. Verses that are, when you listen to these verses, you don't talk about them, you don't try to, they are clear in meaning and clear as to their source. Al-qat'iyyat, for example, aqimus salah, there is no discussion about the fact that we have to pray. When you deal with the universe, we have exactly the same. Sunan al-Kawniyya is, these are immutable references, you have to deal with them the way they are. For example, something which is implicit in anything that you have to deal with, why do you have in the Quran, Qasas al-Quran? The stories in the Quran that you have about some people is always showing you that to change people you need time. There is no way for you to change people by just coming and thinking that in one day you can change things. It takes time. This is min as-sunan al-kawniyya. You need to deal with this historical factor if you want to reform a society. And when it is said, for example, Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin, the verse that we are always referring, that Allah is not going to change what is in a society as long as you don't change what is in yourself. Meaning, in fact, to change a society, it's not only by the structure, it's by the understanding and the hearts, it's by the minds, it's what in yourself. So you change a society not by reforming the structure, by questioning the essence of life and the essence of human beings. So this is something which is min as-sunan al-kawniyya, how things are changing. If you want to act on the world, you need to deal with the sunan al-kawniyya. And among the sunan al-kawniyya, you have some sunan, some that are qat'iyyah, they are not going to change, and you have things that are changeable because we are dealing with culture. So you need to deal with the cultural factor of things. So not only we have rules that are not changing, but we have cultures that are always changing. So this is also min al-dhanniyat al-qawl. It means that in the world, in the universe, you have things that are changeable and things that are not, things that are immutable, exactly the way you are dealing with the verses. So the Quran and the world, the Quran is the source, but the universe is the source. The creation is the source of al-akhlaqiyat, meaning the way you are going to deal with the sunan al-kawniyya, which will have an impact in the good behavior. The good behavior is acknowledge what Allah has created as it is, and then deal with it. Let me give you an example which has a very important thing here. In the Western tradition, we say, you know what? There is a very specific word which is tolerance. Tolerance, in fact, is a rational way of dealing with the other. I'm tolerating you means I tolerate your presence because my rationality is teaching me that there is a diversity and I have to be respectful. Min as-sunan al-kawniyya, if you understand this, in Islam, tolerance is not enough. Tolerance is giving to your mind much more than what the text is telling you. Because Allah is saying in the Quran, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. If God has wanted, He would have made you one community. And He's saying to the Prophet, ﷺ, وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ لَآمَنَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ كُلُّهُمْ جَمِيعًا. If your Lord, if your educator would have willed, all the people in the world would have believed. You can't impose it to people to believe. More than that, وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضَهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ لَفَسَدَتِ الْأَرْضِ. If there were not a set of people against a set of people, the earth would have been corrupt. Listen to these verses. These verses are coming from Allah, and they are telling us diversity is not a choice. Diversity is a fact. And if you deal with the fact, you don't start to tolerate, you respect. You respect the will of God. And you respect the will of God mean exactly what we are referring to when we come to Surah Al-Hujurat, when it is said, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. The first is to respect, and the second thing that you have to do with this respect is to know the other. The way you deal with diversity is respect and knowledge. This is a fact. This is not something that you can think about, oh, I'm tolerating, suffering the presence of the other. So look at this. This is something which is deep. Tolerance is not an Islamic concept if we are getting the concept literally. In fact, we have to go beyond by saying tolerance is not enough. Tolerance is the first step of our rational understanding. Our deep And spiritual understanding of diversity is respect is the starting point. Anyone who is not respecting diversity or only tolerating is not getting the very essence of the Sunnah al-Kawniyya. Allah is telling us, this is a fact because this is what you need to be good Muslim. In fact, diversity is a necessity of your faith. So you can see here that in philosophical terms, what we had in the 18th, the Enlightenment coming with toleration, you can talk about toleration when you talk to power, but when you come from God, you don't talk to power. You impose onto power the respect of diversity. You don't talk to power to be respected. You remind power that they have to respect the fact. So I think here that it's important. You can see the implication of this when it comes to our contribution to the world today. How do we deal with diversity and pluralism? In ethics of pluralism, it's also something that we have to provide the world with, and we should be much more involved in this discussion when it comes to this. So, universe is a source, and this once again came from the very old tradition, 11th century, with Abu Hamid al-Ghazali again. And you will see that what was humanism and Reformation in the West came in the 15th century, and this was a very important point. In fact, the way the humanists were challenging the Roman Catholic Church as being the only religious power was by saying this: the world is a book. And the world is a book. It's something which was said in the 15th century. You find it in the 12th century in the Islamic tradition. That Al-Kitab al-Manshur, which is the deployed book, and this is something, if you come to our understanding, in fact, never Al-Quran was presented and understood in the Islamic tradition as verses world, but ayat here and there, science in the world, science in the universe. These are two books that are talking to one another. And you have qat'iyat here, qat'iyat there. Dhanniyat here, dhanniyat there. Rules here and rules there. And you need to get the two sources, in fact the three main sources. First, of course, Al-Quran, the Sunnah, and then, of course, the world. Adding to this, that if the world is a source and the text is a source, in order to read the text, the two texts, you have one fourth source is reason. Reason is the source. And this is what Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was saying, al-aqlu wahyun dakhili, which is your mind is an inward revelation. And you have to trust your mind if your mind is dealing in the light of the revelation. So this mistrusting science, mistrusting knowledge is something that is alien to our tradition, because it's a source of akhlaqiyat as well. Now, if you come to the third thing, and you can understand that these are the fundamentals, and if you want to reform, you have to be clear on the fundamentals, terminology, and then sources. Now there is something which is also has to do with, okay, from the terminology and the sources, what we are talking about is the knowledge. How do we deal with this knowledge? And to get the knowledge is to question the methodology. How do we deal with the sources? And how do we deal with the sources in our world to try to get answers? So between the sources and the challenges, you need a methodology. And if you come to the fuqaha, you understand that there is something which was essential in the way they were dealing. When you come to the Quran and you have an ethical stand or an ethical obligation, how do you deal with the Quran? How do you understand that you have to pray? How do you understand that you have to fast? How do you understand that you have to give zakat? So to do this, they were saying, look, there is no obligation in the Quran which is not rationally understandable, is what they were saying. It's not irrational. It's never the Quran is not irrational. Anyone who's telling you, oh, I refer to the Quran, I don't use my mind, I say, you have a problem with the way you refer to the Quran. Because the way you refer to the Quran is to use your mind. Now, the fuqaha from the beginning was saying things that are very simple in very focused way. When, for example, you have an obligation. Why do we have to pray? Very simple. In al-ibadat, even with the ibadat is where a Muslim is saying, Sami'ana wa ata'na. We heard and we obey. And still with this, you hear and you obey, but still there is a reason. So the first one is a very simple thing, is al-'illah. Al-'illah is the raison d'être. Why do we pray? For example, we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calling Musa alayhi salam, Innani ana Allah la ilaha illa ana fa'budni wa aqimis salata li dhikri. You have to pray in order to remember me. So the very essence of praying, the 'illah, the raison d'être, is to remember. So we have something which, this is the way they were dealing with and some others was going with another word, which is al-hikmah, which is the wisdom behind the rule. There is a wisdom. What is al-maqsad, which is the objective. What is the objective? And sometimes the scholars were saying there is no reason. So this is where you stop to say, if there is no reason to a rule, does it make this rule irrational? No. No reason doesn't mean irrational. No reason means the limit of rationality. And limit of rationality is rational. When you say, this is the limit, I can't understand. For example, why do you pray 5 times a day? Why do you have 7 during the tawaf? Why 7? Why these numbers? So the scholars were saying, there is no reason, and the reason not having reason is the reason. This is coming from our legal tradition, saying there is no reason. Some Sufi would say, yes, there is always a reason, this is symbols, and I'm not talking about this. I'm just talking about the fuqaha, saying there is no reason why 5, and in fact, because there is no reason, it's just for you to surrender, to say, Sami'na wa ata'na. So it's your rationality reaching the limit and God saying, you do this because I'm asking you to do that. So it's where your rationality comes to just meet your heart. And your heart is saying the reason that there is no rational reason is the reason of your heart. لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا. You have to understand with your heart as well. And it's the way you surrender. This is the meaning of istislam. Is where you are saying that's coming from God. It's important to understand that in this there is a methodology. Now, the Mu'tazila in the rationalist tradition, very often today, be careful with the Mu'tazila in history. Because you have some people now referring to Mu'tazila, they don't really know what Mu'tazila was at that time, and they are using now modern means to use Mu'tazila to say, you know what, even the Quran is not the very word of God, and they are changing in modern terms the very essence of Mu'tazila, and some were pushing very far. But what they were saying is that there is nothing in the Quran which is against the rational teaching, the rational understanding, and they were saying that the source is rationality. And rationality, there is no problem for us as within the Muslim tradition to accept that rationality is in itself a source, and that rational logic, rational construction, rational reference, all this is something that we are dealing with, and in every field, in medicine, in education, we are using our rationality, and this could be part of a methodology. In fact, the methodologies are always the product of your object of study. You don't come with imposing, as a medical doctor, you don't come with your methodology and you impose it into the body. The body is telling you this is the methodology that you have to follow. So you have to be rational on that way. The body is telling you the way you have to act. Nature, environment is telling you the way you have to. Allah is sending you the methodology through a sunan al-kawniyya. Sunnah, you have to take from this. So the same, when you deal with the Quran, you need to know the language, you need to know the semantic, you need to know the grammar. The world has a grammar, the world has a semantic, the world has a logic. You have to take the methodology from here. So this is rational. This is, you have to extract this. So al-Usuliyun, they were very rational in the way they were extracting. Al-Shafi'i, Ja'far ibn Sadiq, all this tradition, they were rational in the way they were extracting. So there is a rational take here. And then something which is important here is from the methodology is what, for example, came from Madrasat al-Maqasid. I'm talking about this in Radical Reform, Islamic Ethics and Liberation, is in fact what Al-Juwayni, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, al-Shatibi came with in the field of ethics, is to try to combine something which was coming from the fuqaha, and it was obvious, the way to say the raison d'être, al-illa, al-hikmah, al-ubudiyya, al-maqasid, or al-qasd, al-hukm, and then also the rationalistic way of dealing with nature, and to say what we need to do is to think about the higher objectives. What are the higher, and to put this as a school, but in fact it's to synthesize the whole dimension that we find between the rationalist in philosophical terms and the fuqaha in the legal terms, and to come with this and say this is what we have to promote. So we need a methodology, and the methodology today that is going to be very efficient, and this is why we are coming back to revisit all this tradition of the maqasid. It's important. Now, with all this, these are the fundamentals. And that's all fine. We can say, okay, that's fine. Let us start with this. You can agree or not, but at least this is the framework. Now, how are we going to deal with all this means and references? So, words as to the terminology, sources as to a frame of reference, and then a methodology as to deal with the contemporary challenges. This is the three things that I just referred to. How do we reform? So I would say that the first thing that we have to do, if we want to reform, is liberating our minds. And I would say that this is the starting point, that very often today as Muslims, our main concern is how do we respond to the Western challenges? Or how do we respond as dominated people? I'm not talking in political terms, even though, again, I can talk on political, I'm talking in intellectual terms. It's as if, everything which has to do with, for example, in that field, in ethical terms, many things are coming from the West. Very often the questions and the challenges and science and knowledge is are coming from the West. And we feel as dominated, and our understanding of this is how do we respond. Now, I'm not denying the fact, and it would be silly to deny the fact that we are responding, and we are dealing with civilizations and a state of affairs where the great majority of the contemporary knowledges are produced in the West. You can't deny this. The question is, are you responding to questions that are coming from the West at the stage or at the level of the knowledge, or are you coming back to your own references to put the questions differently and to try to find answers that are are the Muslims able to put new questions as to the way we deal with knowledge? Because in the deconstructive, the deconstructivist and what we have within academia, ask yourself, and it's a very important, what we know coming from our religion, be careful. La ilaha illallah means, in fact, from the very beginning, that you have a comprehensive understanding of what are the challenges. You have to get an access somewhere. Or what we have with contemporary knowledges is to lose the access, is to deconstruct everything. So you are so specialized in one field that we need answers in this field. So you can be in bioethics coming with, what about, and very simple thing is, what about dealing with organs, for example? What dealing with cloning? Right? And you come with a very, 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 very focused questions, and you come with an answers. But be careful, if you don't ask from where comes this question, in which frame of reference, what is the main question, how do you deal with it? You can have a very updated answer to this question completely in contradiction with the whole picture. And I give you an example. We had a discussion on bioethics in one of our seminars with Kyle, and in the middle of the discussion, we were talking about, how do we deal with bioethics in a very specific way. One of our scholars, Sheikh Al-Raisouni, stopped the discussion and said, okay, I have a question. He stopped, because we were pushing and pushing and pushing. They said, okay, what is medicine then? Meaning, in fact, the way we go with very specific things, if we don't have the very clear understanding of what medicine is, we are lost. And the deconstructivist approach is to lose you in the, you have no access, you have no comprehensive approach. So if we are obsessed with what are the questions coming from the West, we might be answering the questions as dominated people, not questioning the framework as free people, free minds, contributing to the discussion of our time. And this is where we have psychologically, intellectually, to liberate ourselves from this kind of a inferiority complex, or the new contemporary psychological Muslim complex when it comes to deal with some of this discussion. And this is where I'm saying we need to also, from liberating our psychology in the way we deal with the problem, is how we can produce something which is a comprehensive approach, while it doesn't mean that by being comprehensive we are not specialized. And this is the balanced approach which is important in everything. It's also, we need to get with a new understanding, a new approach of our, the way we read the text. Why? Because the consequence of this attitude in our psychological way of dealing with contemporary scientific questions, or ethical questions as to knowledge, is very often also a way we read the text, which is now becoming the norm, is to come back to, as we cannot challenge the questions, as we don't provide people with a comprehensive approach, we end up thinking about our text in a way which is dealing with rules that are protecting us from the whole discussion. So we are